Welcome to the Natural Medicine Mamas podcast, where our vision is to help families stay and be healthy using natural methods for the body, mind, and soul. We encourage self-reliance in any medicine practice for your family, and our products and advice are designed to help you learn more about caring for your family with herbs. Now introduce your hosts, Paula, Andrea, Misha, Kalea, and Goldie, your Natural Medicine Mamas. You can find us at naturalmedicinemamas.com.
Hello, everybody. Here we are on a Natural Medicine Mamas podcast call. I'm on a phone call. It's a podcast call. And we've got Misha with us today and Kalea with us today and myself, Andrea, and Mom, Paula, will be joining us probably in a few minutes. So today we're going to talk about teas and the different reasons why we make teas, how we use them. There's lots of different applications inside of herbs, and I think a lot of times people get overwhelmed by trying to decide what applications to use and when and why and all of those little details. So we're going to talk about specifically the teas today and why we would use them and how and what's the purpose and why you would use a tea compared to a tincture and glyceride and all those different things. So I'm going to turn some time over to Misha. She's going to talk about how to make it and get into some of the qualities of it. And Kalea is going to talk about why you would use the application. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of discussion about this because we love the different application of herbs and examples of how they've helped our lives. So I'll turn it over to you, Misha.
Thanks, Andrea. So this is Misha, and I'm the oldest of the sisters of the Natural Medicine Mamas. And I'm going to talk to you about how to make an herbal tea. So before I do that, I just want to kind of clear up some questions that are pretty common around this topic. And that is that you'll hear some different kinds of words used to describe really basically the same thing. So what I would call a tea, and what most of us think of as a tea, is when I have leaves of something, some kind of plant material, and I pour water on it, over it, and then I let it sit for a while. And that definition of preparing and using a plant material, or herbs, or whether that be leaves or roots or flowers or bark or whatever, applies to a few different words that I'm going to describe. So some words that you might hear in the herbal world is, one of them is called an infusion. And basically that's a tea. So we call something an infusion basically when we don't let it sit for a super long time. And we don't use super hot water on it. So for example, when I make my tea, just because I'm busy, I let the water come to a boil on the stove, and then I pull it off the stove and let it cool down for a few minutes, and then I pour it over my plant material, the leaves and stuff. And then I let it sit for about 15 to 20 minutes. That is an infusion. A decoction is the same thing, but when you put the plant material and you let it actually kind of simmer on the stove for a little while. Now, this would be more appropriate to use for the part of the plant that is thicker or heavier. So the roots, the bark, the seeds, so plant material that's harder, okay? So an example of a decoction that I like to make is Brigham's tea. And Brigham's tea is actually the common name of the plant, and it has tea in its name, so hopefully this isn't too confusing. But when I make a tea of Brigham's tea, I actually do a decoction because you use the stems, and they're a really woody stem, this particular plant, and I put it in the water and I let it simmer for a while. If I were to do that with flowers, it would, not that it would destroy it, but the biggest thing, honestly, the reason why I wouldn't do that with flower is because if I let it simmer like that, I would lose all of the volatile oils or the essential oils that are in that plant from letting it simmer. They would just boil away. kind of like when you put an essential oil in a diffuser, it just eventually diffuses out of the water. So that's a decoction. So when I make a tea, and that's part of the reason why it's a very good idea to always cover the cup or the mug or have a lid or whatever on whatever you're using to hold the liquid, because it keeps the volatile oils, the essential oils in the liquid, so that you get the benefit of that along with the other stuff that is in the plant. Also, just kind of a fun little side note that you can also use the sun and the moon to make infusions, and this is a part of herbology that we use a little bit. We're not super, I don't know what the word would be for that, but I made a few sun teas this summer, and it's kind of fun. And some people do it because it helps them feel more connected with the solar cycles or the lunar cycles, and they feel like when the sun and the moon are in certain places, like around the equinox or the full moon and different phases of the moon and things, that you get more energy out of the plant. And
Mish, probably
so
the term you're, sorry, really fast, the term you're using for is like purist that way.
Like maybe, I don't know.
And maybe part of it is just because we just don't, I think it's awesome, but I just don't even have time to think about making a tea specifically with that cycle. Like, I just want to get it done. You know, just the time element.
Right. That's really a personal thing. But I did make a sun tea this summer because I wanted to try it. I hadn't tried it before. And to be honest with you, I put it out on my porch, and I've used a glass quart jar, like a canning jar. And I used just stuff from my yard. So I walked around my yard and clipped stuff off and threw it in there. And I was actually really surprised how hot it got sitting in the sun in that glass jar. I mean, it was as hot as if I'd poured, just recently boiled water over it. It was super hot, and which was cool. I mean, it infused all my plants really nicely. I had a really nice tea, and also if you feel one that feels connected to plants, doing a sun tea or a lunar tea might help you feel more connected to those plants as well. So those are just other options available to you, and really that just becomes a personal preference.
Also, Mish, that reminds me, that sounds, at least the beginning of that process sounds really similar to the process that you use to make your own flower essences. So if that's interesting to anyone, that's a similar process too. And you can look that up, and maybe I can find some good instructions and put it in the show notes too.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, so anytime you use water with a plant material, you're basically making some variant of a tea, or an infusion is really probably the better word to use. The other thing to consider or remember or think about when you use water and herb material is that it's not just for drinking. So most of the time we think about this, and that's going to be something that I'm going to consume. There are other examples of when you could use it and make compresses or drops for something. So a good example of that would be making a calendula compress for your skin. So what I'm saying there is I'm actually making a tea, but instead of drinking the liquid, I'm going to soak a washcloth in the water after I strain it off, and then I use that soaked washcloth or gauze or whatever it is I'm doing. And unfortunately, we don't really have enough time to go into all the uses of that enough, but it's definitely an option. An example of that I've used recently was to make some eye drops for my kids. I've had really, really, really good success making an eye drop when it looks like my kids are trying to get pink eye, and haven't had to use antibiotics on them for 7 or 8 years probably.
Well, and we've used, just for people to know, the herbs that you use for those eye drops mainly are eye bright and golden seal, right? That's what I've used.
Yeah, and the last time I made it, I actually did calendula and chamomile as well.
Oh, cool. Simply
for the soothing that those two plants have, when the eye's really itchy and stuff. So that's another application. I guess I should also add that after you have infused the plant material, you've got to strain it. And actually, that isn't something that you have to do. You do not have to strain it. And really, it's just you end up straining it if you don't want to eat the leaves while you drink it. I guess I should say that you could either put the plant material just straight into the water and then strain it through like a little strainer, or you could put the plant material into, the little muslin bags, and then that way you would get the stuff out of the plants, but then the plant material would stay in the bag, kind of like a tea bag, and you wouldn't have to strain all of that out and still be able to have a nice tea. The one that I like to use, I did a video on YouTube. I have a tall glass bottle, and it has a metal stainless steel strainer in it, and all the herbs go into that strainer, and then I just drink the water. So there's just several different ways to do it. If you do just use loose leaves and you want to strain it, the way I do it in 2 steps. I use like a fine metal strainer like you use for fruit or vegetables, and I strain out the big part of the plant material first, and then I use a coffee strainer to strain it one more time to get the little bits of plant material. And that's only because my personal preference, and I know Kalea is the same way, I like to have a smooth tea, and what that means is that it's just the liquid and it doesn't have any plant pieces. If plant pieces get in it, it's not the end of the world. I mean, those are not going to hurt me. In fact, they're probably a great fiber. But I like the texture of having a smooth tea better.
There's something also to remember with that is that there are certain plants that have really, really fine hairs. For example, mullein has really fine hairs, and it has a lot of uses. It's an amazing plant, but I use it probably the most often for respiratory issues. I also use it for glandular issues. But for respiratory-wise, if you make a tea out of it and it has those fine hairs and you drink it and you get those fine hairs on your throat, it probably in the long run helps, but it's irritating in the moment when you drink it. And
that's a great point.
You don't want to irritate your throat more when you already are having respiratory issues. So especially for things like that, I mean, and as you get to know the plants better, you'll know which ones need it more, because some don't need a very fine strain because they're like stems. But when you have something like that, you want to get a fine strain so that you just have a more comfortable experience while you're drinking it.
That's a great point, that in that way in particular, because the plant itself is made, or like when we make Brigham's tea, really I can just do one strain because it's all stems, and so I don't have to do a fine strain with that. So, and I think that covers all of the how-tos on that, I hope. So it is Kalea's turn.
Okay, so as far as teas are concerned, the cool thing about herbs is that there are so many ways that you can use them. And something that I'll bring up right now is a general rule in using herbs is that something to remember that was a really big lesson for me to learn at first, which I learned from Patrick Jones from the Homegrown Herbalist. He actually lives here in Idaho as well, not in the same city, but he is a really good herbalist. And one of the first things that I learned from him was that the plant is the medicine. The tea isn't the medicine, the glyceride isn't the medicine, the poultice isn't the medicine, the plant is the medicine. Like, you don't make it into medicine, I guess is what I'm saying. It already is. But the reason why we make it into these things is that it's a lot more comfortable to rub a salve on your skin than bark, or it's a lot more comfortable to drink a tea than it is to chew on plant leaves. So that's just something that I think is really important to remember. But the cool thing is that throughout time, people have come up with these really cool ways of applying these so that they are more comfortable and so that they're easier to take. So teas, they're probably the best known thing because people drink teas that aren't into herbs at all. People sometimes get confused between when you would take a tea and when you would take a tincture. So the reason why you would take a tea is because the water extracts different things than alcohol or vinegar or glyceride does. So tea extracts the vitamins and minerals out of the plant primarily. And so the reason why you would use that is if you wanted to take a tea like every day and you had like a medicinal tea that you wanted to take every day. It also absorbs more slowly than a tincture. So a tincture goes right in your bloodstream, and we'll get into this when you listen to the tincture podcast, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail there. But a tea absorbs more slowly, which it can actually be to your benefit because it becomes like a slow release type action. So that can be really good. And then it's also, as far as a compress is concerned, you can do hot compresses and cool compresses. And those can be nice because a cold compress constricts your blood vessels, which is nice when it's really hot, okay, or like if you have a hot condition in your body. And then a warm compress dilates them. So if you're having a cold condition, then you'd want to use a hot compress. So the nice thing, too, is that it's kind of like a tea, only instead of absorbing it in your digestive system, you're absorbing it through your skin. So it can help in a specific area of your body instead of having like a whole body approach, that you can have a compress on your shoulder or on your stomach. So you can pinpoint it a little bit better that way. So I think that's all I have.
I think Misha would probably be the one to talk about this, is the difference between the vitamin and mineral qualities compared to the medicinal qualities. Like a lot of people will think, well, isn't that kind of the same? Vitamin minerals they are medicinal. Like what would be specifically extracted with the water compared to specifically extracted with something else?
Okay, so sure. So the first thing I did remember something while Clay was talking to add as well, that there is also the option of, when I talked about, that I would put the warm water over the plant material and let it sit for 15, 20 minutes. There's not like a limit of time. Well, I guess there is, but there's not a huge maximum amount of time that you can let the plant sit in the water, at least in the short term. So what I mean by that is if I let it sit for 20 minutes, I'm going to get a certain amount of the vitamins and minerals pulled out of the plant. If I let it sit for an hour, I'm going to get a few more of those vitamins, minerals pulled out. If I let it sit overnight, I'm probably going to maximize how much of those properties are able to be pulled out of the plant material. So there's some people who like to make a tea at night, and they'll put it like in a big half-gallon quart jar or half-gallon canning jar, or one of those big gallon jars or something like that, and they'll wrap it up with a towel, and they let it sit all night. They strain it in the morning and drink it through the day the next day.
That's what I do.
And to be honest, that's probably really the best way to do it, because then by letting it sit overnight, you maximize how much you get out of the plant. From a realistic point of view, not everybody has time to do that. And it does take a little bit more planning, and so it does end up being a preference thing. I kind of do both, so it just depends on how my schedule is, because I do work some, so it ends up being what my schedule can accommodate. So now let me just add that you wouldn't want to just let it sit there forever and ever and ever, because then eventually it would all go bad and slimy and stuff. So probably the longest amount of time you'd want to let it sit is overnight. There is another application that I kind of forgot about until I just said the slimy, was there are some plants that you can make compost tea out of. And that's basically when you make tea out of plants and you let it sit for so long that it does start to break down. But by allowing the plant to break down in the water for a long time, we're talking over a couple of weeks or something, you end up making fertilizer. So when I have done it, I've usually used my comfrey plants, and it makes really great, we just call it comfrey tea or plant tea, I don't know. And it's great because it's cheap and it works really well, and I can put it on everything. And the biggest downside to it is that it is super stinky. I mean, it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It is extremely smelly. So you have to put it in a part of your yard where you're not going to walk by it very often, or other people don't walk by it very often. It doesn't stink for a huge radius. It's just like right around the bucket that you're making it in. But it is very stinky. So that's another way you could use a tea.
I want to insert here too really quickly. If something that people don't realize that they can do when it comes to teas, especially when it's a short-term steeping, like only for 20 minutes, is that you can double and sometimes even triple steep it. And this is especially true for some of the more dense plant material like the Brigham's tea, like the stems or the roots, that you don't necessarily have to just use it one time and then throw it away, that you can actually steep it multiple times depending on the plant and still get a lot of medicinal properties out of it. So if maybe a budget is a big deal to you or you just like to use your material wisely, that is definitely an option.
Kind of a way to know if the plant is still good is if you get color from it. So that's one way to,
and the taste.
That's a good kind of barometer to know if there's still usefulness in that plant material. Is how colorful in it, and does it still have any of the taste that it had? So the tea that I make for myself, my personal blend, is mostly leaves and flowers. So I usually only steep that twice. Because by the second time I can tell it's not as strong, and the second time I'll just do it half. Instead of using a full cup of water, I'll use a half a cup of water, so it's not as diluted or something like that. Or I'll add it to my new tea so that I have kind of a double strength tea or something like that. But the Brigham's tea, I can use those stems, I would say, at least 4 or 5 times. And I'm able to stretch that out too by the first time I break it at the joint, and then the second time I break the stem. I do that twice, and the third and fourth times I break the actual stem. So it releases more of what's inside.
Can I insert really fast before you keep going?
Yes.
You have to be also very careful about watching whether or not the tea is too strong. There were a couple days where I was making a really strong tea, and you could tell because of the color. It was really, really, really deep. I felt like I needed it, and my body, I just simply added more plant material. Usually it's like a teaspoon to a tablespoon of plant material per cup, and I doubled it, tripled it, because it was after having a baby and I really needed it. And for 2 days it was great. Like, my body soaked it in. The third day I got the worst headache. It was awful. And I don't get headaches. I'm not really prone to them. And when I was talking to Mom about it, I was like, Mom, I don't know what to do about this headache. We started talking about, what had happened. It hadn't even thought about telling her about how strong the tea was. And when that came up, she was like, well, just dial back your plant material. Your body probably is giving you a signal that, okay, you've had enough, you've caught up, and go back to normal. And so I did, and it went away. So it's something just to keep in mind of if you're wanting a stronger tea or you feel like you need a stronger tea, just to be aware of your body's signals of what's working, what's not. And if you're feeling really super drained and you don't feel like your tea is giving you enough, to just add more plant material to give you what you need. So just wanted to insert that you can vary that a little bit sometimes depending on what the needs are.
And that's a great point too, that you can customize it to yourself. There's not like a set way. There's not one right and one wrong way. And with that, I thought maybe I should add kind of an estimate of how much you would use. So in general, if you're making a cup of tea, you want about a heaping teaspoon of dry herb, or if you have fresh, then you'd want about 2 teaspoons of fresh herb. And that's just a suggestion. That's not like, oh my gosh, I used a tablespoon of herbs, that's too much. It's not. It just is really what works best for you. And like Andrew said, you're listening to your body and listening to the signals that you get after you drink that, or even by how it tastes. If the taste is too strong for you, with however much you use, then use a little bit less if you don't like that taste. And honestly, this is another time to add that drinking tea, especially when you start adding plants that you are not familiar with or you haven't tasted before, may at first be a little challenging, because in our society we're used to eating lots of sweet and salty things. We're not used to bitter tastes and sour tastes as much and other things like that. And there's some of the herbs that do have some bitter taste, or they have, I like to call it a woody taste, kind of a planty taste. And when you first start drinking it, you might not like how it tastes, and it might take some getting used to. I know myself personally, that's something that I really look forward to, is that really earthy taste that many of the plants have. It's so wholesome to me, and it's really soothes. I feel really, it's almost spiritual in a way that, these plants have this really earthy, wholesome, full taste to them. It's not artificial in any way. It's just this pure taste, and I really enjoy it. But it might take some getting used to, and that's okay. There's not something wrong with you. And you might find there's some herbs that you don't like how they taste at all, like licorice root. I really don't like how it tastes. And I've tried it like in little bits and other things, and some of the things I've had to find alternate herbs because I just really don't like how it tastes. So that's
something that we've talked about before. I don't think we've talked about it specifically on the podcast, though, is that when you have a specific aversion to a certain plant or an attraction to a certain plant, that's also something to pay attention to. And as you get into it and become more experienced, there's a difference between an aversion to a plant and getting used to the taste of a plant. There is a definite difference. But you should pay attention to that. There are some plants that I just don't want anything to do with them. I don't even like to be near them. And then there are other plants that I feel like I can't get enough of them, and I just want to be by them. So pay attention to those subtle feelings as well.
Well, and I think the more that you add teas to a healthy lifestyle, that's something really to talk about as well, is that teas and any herbal or more natural type of approach to life needs to be added inside of a healthy lifestyle. If you're eating a lot of processed foods, a lot of salts, a lot of sugars, and trying to compensate with your tea, it's not going to be enough. You need to have a very healthy lifestyle involved in it. And the more healthy I am, the better I eat, the more I pay attention to my body, and the more that I treat my body with love and respect that way with what I give to it, the more my body talks to me. And I don't want to sound too woo-woo-y, but it really is a very deeply spiritual thing because our bodies are made of both spirit and matter. And we've got to pay attention to how they work together that way. So really fast, before we close, Mish, I really do think it's important to talk about the difference between medicinal and vitamins and minerals, because I think a lot of people don't understand the specific words and ways that they're used. And we'll probably go more into this with the tincture podcast, but I think it's worth mentioning just a little bit here involved with teas too. Could you just go over that really quickly, Mish?
Yes. So we keep getting sidetracked by all these other things, which is funny because at first we were talking about this, this won't take for long, and all of a sudden we're thinking, let's mention this and let's mention that. It's really pretty dynamic, which is exciting, really. So, like Clay mentioned, when you use water with the plant, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to extract that material from the plant and make it kind of more usable for your body. So water is really good at pulling out the vitamins and the minerals that are in the plant material. That is different from the medicinal properties, and what we mean by that is things like the alkaloids and the flavonoids and the esters and those chemical properties that the plant has. And water will pull some of those out, but alcohol's better at that. So I have seen some arguments in some like Facebook groups and stuff that people are like, oh, well, that's not going to work because it's not a tincture. And while there's definitely some truth to that, the other thing to keep in mind when we're talking about being well and having good health is that your body needs to be fed. So when we use the water to pull, and of course we're going to use good water. I mean, I don't want to use impure water for this. I need to use good water. And we could have arguments about that all day. I just use tap water, but we live in a place where our water's clean. So other people would probably want to use spring water and stuff like that. So when I do that, and now I have my liquid that has all this stuff in it, when I drink it, it's a lot easier for my body to use it in that form than in a pill form. And the reason for that is because I could find an article that talks about it, but to me, honestly, the easiest way to describe it is that's the way God intended it to be. God intended for us to eat our food to get the maximum use out of it. And when I make a tea with this plant material and it pulls all that stuff out, it's still in a really absorbable form. And it's easy for it to get absorbed through my stomach lining and then to be able to get into my bloodstream so that it's usable by my tissues. Because what I'm trying to do is get these vitamins and minerals to the cellular level, right? And like I said, there's some people that argue that that's not really very helpful. Well, I would argue that it is actually very helpful because when your cell walls have the vitamins that they need, they have really good integrity. And what that means is that the cell wall is really strong and it's able to survive attacks by viruses or bacteria or fungi or whatever a lot better than a cell wall that is really leaky. So when I'm drinking this liquid that has all these vitamins and minerals in it, my body uses it in a more efficient way than if I take it in a pill. And when I take it in a pill, and that's fine if that's what you need to do because that's what works for your life. That's definitely better than nothing. Just know that you don't absorb it quite as well. So anyway, really, that's just it. It's just that your body uses it better. And to me, the best reason to explain that is because that's how we were created. We weren't created to take pills. Our bodies weren't created intending to take pills. Our bodies were created with the intention of eating food, eating plants, eating whatever to keep us healthy. So if you guys feel like I need to add anything to that, let me know, but Clay can go.
This isn't a personal story. I have one of the books that was written by the Duggar family, the Duggar parents, and the mom has a story in there about how she was really faithful about taking her prenatal every day. And she had some kind of health issue where she had to go and get an x-ray done on her stomach, and they found several undigested prenatal pills in her stomach. And she saw them and realized that they really weren't doing her very much good that way. So she just started using like a chewable form. But that was really fascinating to me, just that she was able to actually see several pills in her stomach from the last several days that she had taken them.
And the same thing can happen the other way. It can go through your whole body and not get broken apart at all.
Mm.
And one way I know that I was taught, and this was a long time ago that I was taught this, so the technique may have changed, but one suggestion that I learned in my pharmacology class was whatever multivitamin you're using, to set it in some water overnight. And if it's still in pill form in the morning, your body probably isn't going to do much of a better job with it. So, but if it has dissolved through the night, then you'll probably get some decent benefit from it.
Yeah.
So that's one way to know that. But again, I always feel like using the actual plant, my body's going to be able to use that a lot more efficiently. And that helps me. That's prevention. So that's illness prevention. And while I can't prevent illness 100% of the time, I can make my body better able to defend against it. So all my cells have really good integrity, and they have lots of vitamin C, and they're really strong. It's going to be a lot easier for my body to get over a virus or bacteria. And so when I start taking that elderberry syrup, my body's going to step up to the plate and be able to defeat it a lot faster when my tissues are healthy on that cellular level. If that makes any sense.
Well, and I've seen that personally in my life. When I am taking my teas and when I'm treating my body well that way, the way that I kick stuff off and my kids is phenomenally better when I get lazy about it. And life happens, and it's not like all of us are perfect at it 24/7 for all of our lives. There's times where I've gone out of my schedule for whatever reason, and all of a sudden I realize it's been a couple of weeks and I haven't had my tea, and I feel it. Big time. I can feel the difference in my kids when I get off of the schedule of really feeding them really well and giving them all of the different remedies it makes a really big difference with their behavior, with their capacity, with fighting sickness, all of it. So I've seen that personally in my own life for sure. So Mom just hopped on, and we pretty much have covered everything about teas. And do you want to say anything about it, Mom, at all?
I would say that, and I am so sorry I'm late. I'm not sure exactly what you've covered so far, but I don't drink as much tea in the summer as I do the winter. 2 reasons. Number one, because it's hot, but I do drink them. But in the winter, I drink a lot more, probably because your immune system's not as good as it is in the summer, being out in the sun all the time. Of course, people that live in a sunny environment all the time don't have to worry about that. But where we are, there's just a lot more tea that is ingested in the wintertime for sure. I've been struggling with some stomach issues and have found that teas have been one of the great helpers to me to be able to get past that on a daily basis. And so they've just, besides the nutritional part, vitamins and all that stuff, there's lots of things they can help with.
Yeah, they're pretty amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast. We covered a lot today, and I'm really happy about it. That was a really good information. So any other questions about it, feel free about getting a hold of us on our Facebook page or through email, naturalmedicinemoms@gmail.com. And we'll see you on the next podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Natural Medicine Mamas. If you have any questions, please go to naturalmedicinemamas.com and reach out to us. Thank you for tuning in, and have a blessed day.